So one of the questions that we often ask young kids as they are kind of growing up and getting a little older is the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Any kids here this morning want to tell us what they want to be? There's not that many, but anybody? What do you want to be when you grow up? A baseball player? Are there, yeah, in the back. What is it? A teacher? Yep. Anybody else? Any adults want to tell us what you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. Yeah. Brady, you want to tell us? An orthopedic surgeon. There we go. Talk about ambition. That's amazing. Yeah, so for me, when I was younger, it was always Michael Jordan. That was my answer. I want to be Michael Jordan. Like, I can't tell you how many hours I spent in my backyard practicing my game-winning turnaround jump shot, three-point land to win the championship. Like, I was ready to go. As you can see, that didn't turn out. Like, I did not become Michael Jordan. But we often ask kids at a young age, what do you want to be when you grow up? We have a 3, almost 4-year-old neighbor who lives right next door. And on Wednesday, I was sitting out on our front porch just drinking a cup of coffee, and he comes out. He's got his bike helmet strapped on. He's got one of those bikes that you don't actually pedal. You just kind of push with your feet. His name's August. I'm like, hey, Augie, what you doing, man? Where are you going? He's like, I'm going to chase garbage trucks. And I was like, oh, really? So Wednesday is trash day in our neighborhood, and what he and his mom and his little brother do is when the trash truck comes to pick up the trash, they just follow the trash truck through the neighborhood to watch it pick up garbage cans and dump them into the truck. He loves it and thinks it's great. On Thursday, the very next day, early in the morning, again, just out there drinking coffee, he's running down the sidewalk with a toy fire truck, but it's a good-size fire truck, got a fire truck hat. I'm like, hey, man, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to put out fires. And he's just going from one house to the next, sitting in front of them, putting out the fire. And that day, that night, Thursday night, there's a knock on our side door. I go to answer it, and through the window, I can't see anybody. I open the door, and Augie is standing there, dressed head to toe in a construction uniform. He's got a hard hat on, got his vest on, tool belt with a saw and a hammer. It comes right into my house and starts to fix things. Now, I didn't necessarily ask him the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? But on any given day of this week, I could have asked him that question, and he probably would have said, a guy who drives a trash truck, a firefighter, or a construction worker. And this is a fine question to ask kids when they're younger. What do you want to be when you grow up? Because it gives them a sense of understanding the future and their potential and the thing that's unique to them, the passions that they may have, and helps them envision the future. So we should be asking that question, but I wonder if there's an even more important question that we actually fail to ask when kids are younger. It's not the what do you want to be question, but it's the who do you want to be? Who do you want to be when you grow up? See, the question of what, even though, again, it's a fine question and talks about purpose and calling in life, it's a question of activity, but the who question is a question of character. And it gets us reflecting on, who are we and who do we want to be? And I would say this is a really good question, not just for young people, but also for adults, because I'm not so sure even adults spend much time asking the question of who do I want to be? So that's the question for you this morning. Who do you want to be? And if you've never thought about that question, if you've never wrestled that through, the book of James is very helpful in getting us to think about who are we called to be. And I think, again, if you've never wrestled through that, our passage today will help us get there. Now, we're going to jump ahead in a minute to chapter 3, but we're actually going to start back at the beginning of the book before we get to our passage today. So we're going to start in chapter 1. Now, just as a little recap, it's thought that James, the book of James, is written to a group of Christians who are working through a hard season, a difficult season of life. And the reason why people think that is because James opens his book talking about hardship and persevering through hardship. He says this is chapter 1, verse 2. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Now, this is a jarring way for anybody to begin a letter because James is saying, hey, be joyful about your difficult circumstances. I've never met anybody who has suffering come their way and they're like, I've been waiting for this my whole life. I'm just loving this suffering. Like 2 weeks ago, I was up at Fort Wilderness teaching up there for the week. And the way that they finish their week of family camp is they have this outdoor kind of like celebration worship service where they sing some songs. The kids do a little presentation of what they learned in their classes that week. They hand out some awards. They show a video of like a recap video of just pictures and videos from the week of what happened. It's this really great, fun, celebratory time. We're in the middle of this service, and a woman who's about 80 years old just falls over, like just passes out, falls over, hits her head on one of the outdoor benches as she's going down, is just laid out for like 5 minutes. Naturally, the service just stopped. Everybody got quiet. There was great concern throughout the crowd, like, what's going on? I'm praying, like, please, Lord, like, help her sit up because we don't want their family, kids, grandkids to remember this is the day when mom and grandma took a really bad downward turn. Eventually, she sat up. They got her in a cart. Ambulance came and picked her up. She ended up being okay. Nobody in the family, as they were walking her to the hospital and walking her to the ambulance, was giving high fives like, this is great. We're so glad that we get to work through this hardship and difficulty. Usually when difficulty hits, we're like, I want to get through this as fast as I can. But James is saying something very, very different. There's a reason that we can have this perspective in the midst of hardship. He says in verse 4, because let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. See, he's not saying rejoice because of your hardship, but even in the midst of difficulty, we can trust God because we believe that with God, our trial isn't wasted. God is at work in the midst of our difficulty to bring about something new in our life. Now, not only does James begin his letter talking about persevering through hardship and difficulty, he also ends his letter talking about the exact same thing, and he uses prophets from the Old Testament and the Old Testament figure of Job as a way to illustrate working through and having perseverance in hardship. So if we go to the end of James, this is James 5, verse 10 and 11, we read, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. So there you have it. At the beginning and at the end, James is talking about persevering through hardship and difficulty. And what's really interesting is there is one word that is used in both of those passages that I think is a clue to the unifying theme of James' letter. And it's the word teleos. It's the Greek word teleos. You see it at the very beginning in chapter 1. You see it at the very end in chapter 3. You actually see it used throughout the letter. James will use it just about 8 times in these 5 chapters. Now, what I want to do, just real quick, is to do a little word study with you on teleos. I'm super excited about this. I've been eager about this all week. I think this is going to be the highlight of your Sunday. You are going to love this. So we're going to go fast and furious. Hang with me. I think you'll be able to keep up, and you'll walk away being like, oh my gosh, Brian, that was the best part of my Sunday. Here we go. So teleos is a very versatile word. It can be translated in lots of different ways, as we will see, but the substance of its meaning, I think, holds regardless of how it's translated. So if we go back to chapter 1, verse 4, we see this word teleos used twice in that verse. James says, let perseverance finish its work. The word finish in Greek is teleos, so that you may be mature. The word mature in Greek, also teleos, mature and complete, not lacking anything. So right there in one verse, you see the same word being translated in two different ways. Teleos is finish, also translated as mature. Now, if we were to jump back to the end of the letter again, go back to chapter 5, where James is again talking about hardship and having perseverance through hardship, and he mentions Job. He says this. He says, "You have heard of Job's perseverance, and you have seen what the Lord finally brought about." Those three words, finally brought about, in Greek, one word, the word teleos. So in those two verses, you have teleos translated three different ways: finish, mature, and finally brought about. Now, if we were to jump into the middle of the book, if we were to go to chapter 2, this is the point where James is talking about allow your faith to be seen amongst other people by your deeds. Your faith isn't just something you say you have, but it should be demonstrated. It should be lived out. In that section, he also uses the word teleos, specifically talking about Abraham. Talking about Abraham being willing to give up his son, who he waited 25 years to have because the Lord is calling him to give up his son. And this is what we read. This is chapter 2, verse 22. You see that his referencing Abraham, his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. So in addition to finish, mature, and finally brought about, teleos is also translated made complete. And then if we were to jump to chapter 3, verse 2, where James is talking about our speech, our tongue, the words that we say, he uses this word again. This is chapter 3, verse 2. He says, "We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what he says is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check." Now, James, again, adds to this list: finish, mature, made complete, finally brought about. Teleos is also translated perfect. Now, James is a little tongue-in-cheek in verse 2 of chapter 3. Did you catch that? My dad joke for the day, he's tongue-in-cheek talking about your tongue? No, it's all right. If you don't get it, just think about it. It'll come to you later. He's tongue-in-cheek about this one because he's basically saying nobody can tame the tongue. Like, you can't tame the tongue. He says if anyone is perfect with their language, they keep their whole body in check. But he's also saying that's really hard to do. But throughout all of these different translations of this one word, finish, mature, made complete, finally brought about, perfect, it's a very versatile word. The substance of its meaning holds in that what James is saying by using this word over and over and over is that there is a desired outcome. There is a desired result for one's character and one's faith. There's a desired outcome for one's character and their faith. Now, sometimes we have these moments in life where we start to think about the future. We try and get our head above the horizon. We try to anticipate what might be coming later for us in life. And oftentimes, as we're kind of moving into what might be a year of transition, we start to think about that. In different seasons, we start thinking about what is coming next for me. That could be when you're in high school and you're getting to graduate. You're thinking about college. Where do I want to go? What do I want to study? When you're in college, you start thinking about your career, what happens after college, what do I want to do, where do I want to live? Once you finish college, you might be thinking about, hey, I want to move somewhere, I want to meet somebody, I want to start a family, I want to settle down. We have all of these moments in life where we start thinking about what's next. I had one of those a couple years ago when I turned 40. So I'm 43. On my birthday is kind of around the holidays leading up to Christmas. And as we were moving through December, when I was 39, I was thinking 40 is just going to be another number. It's going to be another turn of the page, just another check of the box. I'm a year older. We moved through the holidays. We got into the beginning of January, and one day I woke up and I'm like, holy cow, like I'm 40 years old. Like, how did I get here to all of a sudden be 40? And I had this like panic about me. I had this like sense of urgency Because I've seen time is moving along faster and faster, and I started to think to myself, I have 25 years. Again, assuming I retire at 65, who knows if I will. But I just started thinking, like, I have 25 years. And I started thinking about, like, what do I want to be doing when I'm 65? Like, what do I want my career to look like? What do I want to have accomplished in my work by the time I hit 65? What about my health? I still want to be able to be active and do the things that I love to do now. And what about my finances? Will I have enough money to retire at 65? And I only have so much time with my kids. What do I want to be doing with them now so I don't have regrets about parenting them? I started thinking about all these things. And the first thing I did was like, I'm going to the doctor. Because I haven't been to the doctor in who knows how long. I'm going to get a checkup, and anything the doctor tells me to do, I am going to do. And I'm like, I go to the doctor, and I'm like telling the doctor all this, and he's just like, you're going to be fine. Like, it's going to be okay. You can just take it down a notch. But as I've been reflecting about that moment in my life, which was 3 years ago, and as I've been studying through James, the thing that struck me this week was when I had this freak out moment of turning 40, as I was envisioning the future, everything I was focusing on was the what. What do I want to be doing? Not once did I think about who do I want to be. Meaning, James has this desired outcome for us of who he wants us to be. So often we are focused on the what. What do I want to be doing when I hit this milestone in my life? But it seems as though James is more interested, through the way he uses this word teleos over and over and over, to get us thinking about who. Who do you want to be? So that's our question this morning. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And what James is doing is he's casting vision for us for who he wants us to be. Now, James is often said to be a highly practical letter. And I would say you see it very clearly as you move through it. I mean, he's talking all the time about here's what you can do. Here's your actionable step. You can go out into the world and you can do these things. And I think one of the practical things that James is doing with his letter is he's creating a profile of what it would mean to be a mature follower of Christ. Go back to chapter 1, verse 4. Let perseverance finish its work so that you can become mature. And when you read through his letter as a whole, you start to see he's laying out piece by piece a profile of what a mature Christian does, how a mature Christian lives, who a mature Christian is. Because again, he says, like, mature people, mature followers of Jesus have the ability to persevere through hardship. His profile might look a little something like this, that they persevere through hardship, that they resist temptation. They have an understanding of where temptation lies for them, and they don't just give into it, but they fight against it. They also seek to treat people fairly. They don't use people to get ahead, but they treat people fairly, showing impartiality. They also have this desire to care for those who are less fortunate than them. His hope would be that we actually live out the Scriptures. It's not just something we read and then we set aside, but we read the Scriptures and then we say, how does this impact my life? How do I go out into the world and embody what the Scriptures say? And then he would challenge us to watch our words, to use our words to build people up and not tear people down. You could also add to this profile that he wants people to be single-minded in their devotion to the Lord. Not have one foot in the world and one foot in the kingdom, trying to straddle two different ways of life, but to be fully bought in to the way of the kingdom. And then that we wouldn't be deceived by money, thinking if I just get a little bit more, everything's going to be okay. And then ultimately, that we would be people of prayer. You see all of these things weaving in and out of his letter. And so the question for us is, who do we want to be? Do we want to be this person? Now, sometimes, like if we're a follower of Jesus, we might have this moment of maybe conviction or inspiration of like, I want my life to matter for the Lord. And I want my life to matter for the kingdom. Our mission statement at Meadowbrook Church is that we exist to invite people to discover Jesus and become his fully devoted follower who ultimately influences the world. And so we might have these moments as we follow Jesus to say, I want my life to matter. I want my life to count. One philosopher, writer, Christian thinker named Dallas Willard said this. He said, the thing that God gets out of you, the main thing that God gets out of you is the person you become. Meaning, it's less about what you can achieve for the Lord, and it's more about who you become, because then the things he desires will just naturally, effortlessly flow from you because you have been shaped to be that type of person. God isn't interested in your achievement as much as he's interested in your character. Full disclosure, I think a lot about achievement. I think a lot about my own achievement. When I hit 40, one of the things I was thinking, like, what are the things that I want to do before I'm 65 so I don't live with regret? Because I want to achieve these things. I want to do these things. And some of them, because I'm a pastor, might be, it seems as though he wants to do that for the Lord, but oftentimes it's like, well, I just want to do that so I can check the box and say I did it, and I can feel good about myself. Sometimes our achievement, even if it seems spiritual, can be more self-focused than God-focused, but God isn't really interested in your achievement. He's more concerned about who you become in your character, because the thing that he gets out of you is the person that you want to become. And so let's go back to our list. This is the profile that James is creating. My question for you this morning is, do you want to be this person? Is this who you want to become? Now, I'm going to give you this morning your answer for you because you're sitting here. I'm going to say, yes, you are here and you want to be this person. Whether you actually or not, I'm giving you that answer. I'm assuming you're saying, yes, that's who I want to be. And if that is the case, the question is, how? How do I become that person? So I have a timer on the back. We are 22 minutes into this sermon, and we're just now getting to today's passage. So you're welcome. We're in chapter 3, verse 13. James begins to answer this question for us in this last part of chapter 3, verse 13. He says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that come from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So essentially what James is doing is he's putting a decision in front of his readers. He's asking the question, who do you want to be? And he's basically saying you have two options. There's two ways that you can live. And he's describing this using the language of wisdom. Saying there's two ways of quote-unquote wisdom sitting in front of you. Now, we often think of wisdom in terms of understanding. And we usually assume that it's something you accumulate over time. You accumulate wisdom through knowledge and experience, and it gives you understanding over time. That's not a bad way to think about wisdom. However, the scriptures think about wisdom a little bit differently than that. Because when the Bible talks about wisdom, it's specifically talking about embracing God's design and God's intention for creation. Like he created the world to work in a certain way. He used his wisdom to order creation. But through sin, we have pushed back against that, and we have created our own way of doing things. So there's this contrast all through the scriptures of God's way of doing things or our way of doing things. There's God's design for the world, and then there's our design. And the tendency of people, even people in the family of God, is to slip into following the way of the world and our own wisdom rather than following God's. And it's a tension that you see play out all throughout the Scriptures. I think one of the most clearly seen places in the biblical story is in 1 Samuel. In 1 Samuel, the people of God have already been redeemed from slavery in Egypt. They were in Egypt as slaves for Pharaoh for hundreds of years. God, through Moses, redeems them, rescues them, guides them through the wilderness for 40 years, and ultimately settles them in the promised land. And once they get in the promised land, they start to set up how they're going to run and govern their people. And somewhere along the way, the people ask Samuel, who's like the prophet representing God to the people, "Hey, Samuel, give us a king." And Samuel says, wait. Why do you want a king? God is your king. I mean, don't you just remember? God is the one who rescued you from Egypt. God is the one who provided for you through the wilderness. God is the one who has planted you here and has created a land for you to flourish and thrive. God is supposed to be your king. You don't need another king. And they say, "Samuel, give us a king." And the reason as to why they want a king, they tell Samuel, is so that we can be like every other nation around us. They see all the nations around them having a human ruler as their king, and they assume to themselves, well, we want to be like them, so we must also need a king. How often are we looking at the world around us, thinking to ourselves, like, I need what they have. Like what that person has is probably what I need. What this world says I need is probably the thing that is best for me, and we consult what the world says about how to order our life rather than trusting that God has given us direction in it. And so the question then is like, well, how do you know? Like, how do you know if you're following the way of God versus following the way of the world? And what James is doing here is he's not really describing what God's wisdom is or what the world's wisdom is, but he's laying out the result of here's what will take place in your life if you follow the world's wisdom. He says you'll see that there's bitterness and envy ruling your heart. You'll start to look at what other people have and you'll think to yourself, like I'm owed that. Like, why do they have that and I don't have that? And bitterness and envy start to rule your heart. And then you believe you're entitled to it. So selfish ambition creeps in, and you're like, I'm just going to work, and I'm going to scrap, and I'm going to claw my way to get what I think is owed to me. And then if you do achieve it, you become proud. You're like, look at what I've accomplished with my life. Look at what I have done. Nobody can hold me back. If those things are evident in your life, you're probably following the way of the world. But James says, if you look at your life and you see something very different, if you see peace, and you see yourself being considerate of other people, if you see that your life is full of mercy and it's fruitful and righteousness is flowing from your life, you can believe that that's coming from following the wisdom of the Lord. And if you were to categorize these two lists that James lays out in this passage, he would say that the wisdom of the world is a self-centered wisdom, and the wisdom of the Lord is an other-centered wisdom. And what's really interesting, just last night, I was making dinner, listening to a podcast, and the guest on this podcast was David Brooks, who's a really well-known New York Times columnist, written a bunch of books, lived in New York City for a long time. And part of the conversation on this podcast was David coming to faith and how he came to faith and how he began to believe that like Jesus is Lord over all. And in their conversation, they were talking about the church and culture because he's a writer of all things culture. And they talked about one of the things that has happened in this generation is that there has become a me-centered focus of the world. And that what we have taught young people to believe is that they can individualize their morality. They can decide, we've said, decide what's true for you. Decide what's right for you. Decide your truth and speak your truth. We have individualized morality, and we've put the individual over the community or society, and now people live like, I do what I want. And what I say is right for me is right, and nobody can tell me otherwise. Another author who has written a book called Selfie, How We Became Self-Obsessed and What It's Doing to Us. His name is Will Storr. In an interview that he gave on his book titled Selfie, he said one of the toxic lies of our culture is being told that we can be whatever we want. How many times have we said that? You can be whatever you want, said that to kids. Again, not necessarily bad, but what he's doing is he's making the point is that it's a self-centered approach to the world. Just be whatever you want, rather than, and he's not a Christian as far as I know, but he has what seems to be some sort of heavenly wisdom here, because he says it's about discerning your unique makeup, discerning your gifting, your calling, your passion, and then using that and leveraging that to help other people. Saying we've become so self-obsessed and self-focused that we're not asking the question, how can I use what God has gifted in me for the sake of others? And what James is trying to say is that the way of the Lord empowers who you're called to be. The way of the Lord empowers who you're called to be. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be a person of character? Do you want to be a person who leverages your gifting for the sake of other people and not just hoarding all your gifting for your own self? The call for those who follow Jesus is to leverage their life for the sake of others. Paul says something very similar in Philippians chapter 2, using Jesus as the example, saying we should have the same mindset of Christ, who made himself lower than everybody else in order to lift other people up. So who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person that James is calling you to be? I gave you your answer earlier. Yes. Yes, you do. How do you practically do that? I think there's 4 simple things. One, you have to have awareness of your need for it. Meaning, often what happens is there's a gap in our character. This is who we're called to be, but we live right here. As I'm getting older, what I'm finding is that this gap in my character is way bigger than I ever thought, because my awareness of my fallenness grows the longer I walk with Jesus. So you have to have awareness of there's this massive gap in my character. Like, awareness is the first step to having a change of any kind. And then 2, you have to have some measure of desire. You have to desire to be the person that God is calling you to be. And then 3, all you have to do is ask for it. That's what James says at the very beginning of his letter. He pairs this idea of maturity in chapter 1, verse 4, with the very next verse saying, anybody who needs wisdom, anybody who lacks wisdom, all you have to do is ask. It's chapter 1, verse 5. And if you go to Proverbs, Proverbs is known to be one of the main wisdom books of the Bible. Wisdom is personified as a lady who's out in the city court shouting at the top of her lungs, anybody who needs wisdom, I'm here to dispense it freely and generously. God isn't trying to withhold wisdom. He wants to give it away as freely and generously as he can. And then lastly, the thing to do is pursue Jesus. Specifically, because Jesus is said to be, in 1 Corinthians 1, the wisdom of God and the power of God. If you want to know how to live your life, and if you want to have the power to live it in the way that God designs, Jesus is the person to show you the way. And what's so great about Jesus, what the good news of Jesus is that even when you fall short, even when you have a greater awareness of the gap in your life, Jesus is gentle, he's merciful, and he's kind. In chapter 2, James says mercy triumphs over judgment. God is merciful every time. And even though this idea of teleos has this desired outcome, and it can be put on a slide, and it can be like this profile of who we want to become, teleos is also a process word. Because James says in chapter 1, verse 4, let perseverance finish the work. Meaning this work is in process. Let it finish the work. Keep going. You are in process. Teleos is a process word. Up on 76 in Center, at that corner of that intersection, there's a smoke shop up that way. Some people know it. Anybody ever been to it? Any honest people? I had one guy, first service, popped up his hand like, yeah, I've been there before. Yeah, we got some other people who've been there before. No judgment if you've been there before. But there's this smoke shop, and there's a huge billboard above the smoke shop. I think right now it's a Gruber Law billboard or whatever. Years ago, the FDA put a billboard above the smoke shop, and I thought it was brilliant. It says on the billboard, you didn't fail at quitting, you just haven't finished the process, right? We're all in process. Even when it feels like we fall short, even when it feels like we fail, even when it feels like this is where I'm supposed to be and this is who I want to be, and I just can't get there, if we continue to pursue Jesus, Jesus empowers our next step. Jesus empowers us to say, tomorrow is a new day. And today's fallings and failings and shortcomings don't carry with you into tomorrow. Tomorrow is a new day to start over and try again, because mercy triumphs over judgment. And so for us, the question is, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person that James calls us to be? Or are you content with whatever the world throws at you? If we continue to pursue Jesus, if we trust that he is our wisdom and he is our strength, every day is a new day to become that person. So may you see who God desires you to be. May you even desire it for yourself. And may you pursue Jesus as the one who empowers you to become that person. Lord, we thank you so much for the gift of your word and how it reflects to us who you've called us to be. And how, Lord, we actually have the ability to become that person. Sometimes it may feel overwhelming. It may feel as though there's no way I can get over this mountain or get over this hurdle. But through your strength, your wisdom, Lord, you have empowered us to be those people. So I pray that we would take heart, that we would take courage, that we would trust that you are at work, even in those hard moments, bringing about the thing you desire in us. Amen.